Today I'm going to tell you the story of an outlaw who found a young woman chained behind a barn in the Wyoming wilderness. Jake Blackwood never expected to become anyone's hero, especially not while running from his own violent past, but the truth was more shocking than they imagined. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. Jake Blackwood pressed his body against the rough wooden planks of the barn, his breath visible in the cold Wyoming dusk. Blood from the bullet graze on his arm had soaked through his shirt, the dark stain spreading slowly. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, ever since that job in Laramie had gone to hell. 2 men dead, a posse on his trail, and now a gathering storm threatening to finish what the bounty hunters couldn't. The ranch had appeared like a mirage on the horizon, isolated enough to suggest safety, with outbuildings that promised shelter. The main house sat dark and silent nearly 100 yards away. Jake had watched it for over an hour, seeing no movement, before deciding to risk hiding in the barn until dawn. "Just need to lay low," he whispered to himself, teeth clenched against the throbbing pain. Just till morning. A strange sound made him freeze. At first he thought it might be the wind picking up ahead of the storm, but there it was again, a soft human whimper coming from behind the barn. Jake's hand moved instinctively to his Colt. 6 years as an outlaw had taught him that curiosity was a luxury that got men killed, but something about that sound, its naked desperation, pulled at him. Staying in the shadows, he edged around the weathered structure. The sight that greeted him stole his breath more effectively than any punch to the gut. A young woman sat huddled against the back wall of the barn, her wrists and ankles bound with heavy iron chains secured to a metal ring driven deep into the ground. Her dress, once white perhaps, was now a patchwork of dirt and tears. Long auburn hair hung in tangles around a face that, despite its grime, struck Jake as hauntingly beautiful. She looked up at his approach, green eyes widening with fear, then something else, a flash of desperate hope. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Please don't tell them you saw me." Jake glanced back toward the dark house, understanding dawning like a cold weight in his stomach. This wasn't some sheriff's prisoner awaiting transport. This was something altogether more twisted. "Who did this to you?" he asked, keeping his voice low as he crouched beside her. "The Hendersons." Her voice cracked on the name. "This is their ranch. They'll be back by morning." Jake had heard of the Hendersons. Everyone in 3 territories had. Wealthy cattle barons with political connections stretching all the way to Washington. The kind of family that made their own laws out here. "How long have you been here?" he asked, examining the chains. They were serious ironwork, meant to last, meant to hold. 2 years, maybe more. I've lost count of the seasons. She swallowed hard. "My name is Sarah." 2 years. The thought hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd done things in his life that would damn his soul 6 times over, but nothing like this. Nothing that approached this kind of calculated cruelty. "I'm Jake," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "And I'm getting you out of here." Her eyes searched his face. "You can't. The chains. I've broken out of worse," he lied, already examining the lock. It was solid, but not impossible. "Besides, we've got all night." A rumble of thunder emphasized his words as the storm finally broke overhead, rain beginning to fall in heavy drops that quickly became a downpour. Good, Jake thought. The rain would cover any noise they made, wash away their tracks later. It took him nearly an hour with the tools from his saddlebag, a small file he used for adjusting his rifle sights, and the sturdy knife he'd carried since his days in the war. His wounded arm screamed in protest, but he worked through the pain, metal shavings mixing with rainwater and blood on his hands. When the first manacle finally gave way, Sarah let out a small gasp that might have been pain or relief. The skin beneath was raw and scarred from long confinement. "Almost there," Jake murmured, moving to the next chain. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. "You don't know me." Jake paused, considering the question. In truth, he wasn't sure himself. 6 years of riding with some of the most ruthless men in the territories had taught him to look out for himself first. Last. Always. "Let's just say I've got no love for people who keep others in chains," he finally answered, returning to his work. By the time he'd freed her completely, the storm was at its peak, rain lashing down in sheets that transformed the hard-packed earth to mud. Sarah tried to stand but collapsed immediately, her legs too weak from disuse. Without a word, Jake scooped her up, surprised at how little she weighed. He carried her into the barn where his horse waited, already saddled. He'd planned to rest a few hours before moving on, but plans had changed. "They'll kill you for this," Sarah whispered as he helped her onto the horse. "They'll hunt you down." Jake gave a grim laugh. "Darlin', half the lawmen in Wyoming are already hunting me. A few more won't make much difference." He swung up behind her, grimacing as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. "We'll head north. I know places in the Montana Territory where a man can disappear." As they rode away from the ranch, rain washing over them in cold sheets, Sarah leaned back slightly against his chest. "You're bleeding," she said, noticing the dark stain on his sleeve. "It's nothing. Bullet just grazed me." She was quiet for a moment then. "They say Jake Blackwood is a monster, that he's killed a dozen men." So she knew who he was. Of course she would. His face had been on wanted posters from Colorado to the Dakota Territory. "It's not a dozen," he said flatly. "And every man I've killed was trying to kill me first." She turned slightly, her green eyes meeting his in the darkness. "You're not a monster," she whispered, the words almost lost in the storm. "You saved me." Something tightened in Jake's chest, an unfamiliar feeling he couldn't name. He urged the horse forward, into the rain-swept night, knowing that by dawn, the Hendersons would discover their prisoner gone, and then the real hunt would begin. Behind them, lightning split the sky, illuminating the barn and the empty chains for one brilliant moment before darkness claimed the land once more. Dawn broke cold and clear, the storm having spent its fury sometime in the night. Jake and Sarah had ridden without stopping, pushing through the darkness as the terrain grew increasingly rugged. Now, atop a rocky ridge, Jake reined his exhausted horse to a halt and surveyed the landscape behind them. No sign of pursuit yet, but it wouldn't be long. "We need to rest the horse," he said, dismounting stiffly. His wounded arm had gone from painful to worryingly numb, and he could feel fever beginning to set in. "And I need to clean this cut." Sarah nodded, allowing him to help her down. She was stronger than he'd expected, already regaining her balance after years in chains. When her feet touched the ground, she closed her eyes for a moment, seeming to savor the simple feeling of earth beneath her boots. "There's a stream down there," Jake said, nodding toward a line of cottonwoods in the valley below. "We'll water the horse and tend to ourselves, then keep moving." They made their way down the hillside, Jake leading the horse. Now, in the clear light of morning, he could see Sarah properly for the first time. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight, and though thin from mistreatment, her face had a stubborn strength that matched the determined set of her jaw. "How did they get you?" Jake asked as they reached the stream. He hadn't planned to ask. Other people's troubles weren't his concern, but the question escaped anyway. Sarah knelt by the water, splashing her face and hands before answering. "I was traveling west with my father," she said finally. "He was a doctor, headed to a new practice in California. We stopped at the Henderson ranch when our wagon broke an axle." She paused, staring into the flowing water. "They seemed kind at first, offered us shelter, help with repairs. Then one night I heard shouting. Gunshots." Jake unsaddled his horse, letting the animal drink its fill. "They killed him?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded. "Victor Henderson, the eldest son. He'd taken a liking to me, said I'd be his wife. When my father refused," she trailed off, then continued in a harder voice. "They buried him somewhere on the property, then told me I could join him or accept my place in their household." As Victor's wife? Jake removed his shirt, revealing a muscular torso marked with old scars. The bullet wound on his arm was angry and inflamed. "As their prisoner," Sarah corrected. "Victor's toy, but never his wife. He already had one of those in town." Her voice held no self-pity, only a cold anger that Jake recognized all too well. It was the kind of anger a person lived with day after day until it became part of them. She looked up, noticing his wound. Without a word, she tore a strip from her already tattered dress and soaked it in the stream. "Let me," she said, approaching him. "My father taught me something of medicine." Jake hesitated, then nodded, allowing her to clean the wound. Her touch was gentle but firm, professional rather than tentative. "It needs stitching," she pronounced after examining the gash. "And you're running a fever. We don't have time for stitching. The Hendersons will catch us for certain if you pass out from blood poisoning," she finished. "I saw some yarrow growing by those rocks. It'll help clean the wound and slow the bleeding." While she gathered the plants, Jake kept watch on the ridge they'd descended. The Hendersons would have discovered Sarah missing by now. They'd assume she couldn't have gone far on her own, which meant they'd be looking for someone who helped her, someone on horseback. Sarah returned with a handful of feathery yarrow leaves, which she crushed between two rocks before applying the paste to his wound. The plant's sharp scent filled the air as she bound his arm with another strip of cloth. "That should help for now," she said. "But we need to find real medical supplies soon." Jake nodded, pulling his blood-stained shirt back on. "There's a trading post about 20 miles north of here. Man who runs it doesn't ask questions." They had just finished refilling Jake's canteen when the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Jake motioned for silence, drawing his Colt as he crept up the bank for a better view. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least 6 riders moving fast across the open country, and at their head, a man Jake recognized instantly from wanted posters and newspaper illustrations, Victor Henderson himself, golden-haired and commanding even at a distance. "Damn," Jake muttered, sliding back down to Sarah. "They're coming. Must have picked up our trail where we crossed that stretch of mud." Fear flashed across Sarah's face, but she mastered it quickly. "How many?" "6 that I can see. Maybe more." Jake made a quick decision, grabbing his rifle from the saddle. "Take the horse. Follow the stream north for about 5 miles, then head northwest toward the mountains. The trading post is in a canyon marked by 3 tall pines. Wait for me there." Sarah stared at him. "What are you going to do?" "Buy you some time." He checked his ammunition. "Go on. Now." Instead of moving, she stepped closer to him. "They'll kill you." "Maybe," he admitted, "but they'll do worse to you if they catch us. I've seen what men like Victor Henderson do to those who cross them." For a moment she looked like she might argue further. Then she nodded once, accepting the reality of their situation. "Don't die, outlaw," she said, her green eyes holding his. "I didn't get free just to have your death on my conscience." A smile tugged at the corner of Jake's mouth despite the gravity of the moment. "Yes, ma'am." He helped her mount, then slapped the horse's flank, sending them splashing downstream. As soon as they were out of sight, Jake turned and clambered up the steep bank, finding a position among the rocks with a clear view of the approaching riders. They were moving fast, confident in their pursuit. Jake steadied his breathing, ignoring the throbbing pain in his arm as he sighted down the rifle barrel. The fever made the distant figures waver slightly in his vision, but he'd shot under worse conditions. The first shot knocked a rider from his saddle at nearly 400 yards. The second missed its mark as the remaining men scattered, diving for cover. Jake fired a third time, hitting another horse, before scrambling to a new position as bullets whined off the rocks around him. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to slow them down, enough to give Sarah a chance. And strangely, that mattered more than he would have expected. Sarah reached the trading post as dusk painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The 3 tall pines Jake had mentioned stood like sentinels at the mouth of a narrow canyon, where a weathered log structure nestled against the cliff face. A hand-painted sign reading "Wilson's Trading Post" hung crookedly above the door. She hesitated at the edge of the small clearing, scanning for any sign of pursuit. The horse beneath her was exhausted, foam flecking its neck and sides. She herself felt barely better, muscles aching from the unaccustomed riding, skin raw where the chains had been, and a gnawing worry for the outlaw who had stayed behind to face the Hendersons. The sound of a door creaking open made her tense. A burly man with a graying beard stepped onto the porch, a shotgun held casually in one hand. "Don't just sit there getting darker, girl," he called. "Either come in or ride on." Sarah took a deep breath and urged the horse forward. "Are you Wilson?" The man nodded once, eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. The torn dress, the marks on her wrists, the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Jake Blackwood sent me," she said, watching his reaction carefully. Something flickered in the man's weathered face. Recognition, perhaps even concern. "Where is he?" "There were men following us. He stayed behind." Wilson grunted, scanning the canyon entrance before gesturing her inside. "Best get that horse in the shed. Henderson men been through here earlier asking questions." Sarah's heart sank. "Did they?" "I ain't seen nothing, ain't heard nothing," Wilson said firmly. "That's what I told them, and that's the truth as far as they know." He helped her dismount, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way. "Come on, let's get you inside." The trading post's interior was cluttered but clean, shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to ammunition, fabric to tools. A pot of something savory simmered on a cast-iron stove, the smell making Sarah's empty stomach clench painfully. Sit, Wilson ordered, pointing to a chair by the stove. He ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before her with a chunk of bread. Eat. Sarah didn't need to be told twice. As she ate, Wilson busied himself with securing the building, checking locks, drawing curtains over the windows, loading a rifle that he propped by the door. "How do you know Jake?" she asked between mouthfuls. Wilson's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His pa and I rode together in the war." He paused, then added, "Jake wasn't always running from the law, you know." This surprised her. Somehow she'd imagined Jake Blackwood had been born an outlaw, emerging fully formed with gun in hand and price on his head. "What happened?" she asked. Wilson sighed, settling into a chair across from her. "War changes men, some worse than others. Jake came back, different, harder. Then there was that business with the Hargrove Ranch." "What business?" "Not my story to tell." Wilson shook his head. "Point is, Jake's done things he can't undo. But he's not the monster those wanted posters make him out to be." Sarah thought of Jake's face in the stormlight, the gentleness of his hands as he'd freed her from the chains, the way he'd risked himself to give her a chance at freedom. "I know," she said quietly. The sudden pounding on the door made them both jump. Wilson was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Wilson!" A familiar voice called from outside. "It's Jake. Let me in." Sarah nearly collapsed with relief as Wilson hurried to unbar the door. Jake stumbled in, looking half dead, face pale beneath a layer of trail dust, fresh blood staining his bandaged arm, but very much alive. "You made it," Sarah breathed. Jake gave her a weary nod before slumping against the wall. "Henderson's still on our trail. Lost 2 of his men, but he's brought in reinforcements. They're combing every inch between here and the ranch." Wilson cursed, securing the door again. "How far behind you?" "Few hours, maybe less. I doubled back, laid some false trails. But Victor's a good tracker." "Victor Henderson?" Wilson spat on the floor. "That boy's had a reckoning coming for years." Sarah watched as the older man helped Jake to a chair, cutting away the blood-soaked bandage to examine the wound. Jake winced, but made no sound as Wilson probed the inflamed flesh. "Fever's worse," Wilson diagnosed grimly. "Bullet's still in there. Just bind it up," Jake said through gritted teeth. "We need to move on." "You ain't going nowhere tonight," Wilson countered. "That arm needs tending, and you both need rest. Besides, traveling at night's a good way to break a horse's leg and your neck besides." Jake looked ready to argue, but Sarah intervened. "He's right, Jake. You can barely sit upright, let alone ride." Something in her voice must have reached him, because Jake exhaled slowly and nodded. "Dawn then, no later." While Wilson gathered medical supplies, Sarah knelt beside Jake's chair. "What happened after I left?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Gave them something to remember me by. Took down 2 men before they could properly organize. Then it was just a matter of staying ahead of them." He looked at her properly then, really seeing her for the first time since he'd arrived. "You look better." "Amazing what food and no chains can do for a person," she replied dryly. His expression sobered. "Sarah, you should know. Henderson's telling people I kidnapped you. Says you're his daughter, that I took you from your home." She felt cold anger rising in her chest. "Of course he is. Word's gone out to every lawman and bounty hunter in the territory. $5,000 for your safe return. And for you? Dead or alive? Preferably dead." Wilson returned with a bottle of whiskey, clean cloths, and what looked distressingly like pliers. "This is gonna hurt like hell," he warned Jake. "Want something to bite on?" Jake shook his head, taking the whiskey bottle instead and swallowing a long pull before handing it back. "Just do it." Sarah moved to hold Jake's good arm, offering what support she could. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something there that gave her strength, a stubborn refusal to surrender, despite everything. What followed was brutal, but necessary. Wilson worked with practiced efficiency, digging for the bullet while Jake remained stoically silent, his only reaction the occasional sharp intake of breath and the white-knuckled grip of his hand on the chair arm. Sarah spoke quietly throughout, nonsense words meant to distract and comfort, surprised at her own steadiness after years of helplessness. When the bullet finally came free, a misshapen lump of lead that Wilson dropped with a clink into a metal cup, Jake let out a long, shuddering breath. "Worst part's over," Wilson assured him, cleaning the wound with whiskey before stitching it closed. "Should heal clean now, fever break by morning." Later, after Wilson had made up pallets near the stove and retired to his own quarters at the back of the store, Sarah found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She could tell from Jake's breathing that he too was awake. "Why did you really help me?" she asked softly into the darkness. The truth this time. There was a long silence, broken only by the occasional pop from the stove. "I was 14 when I joined the war," Jake finally said, his voice low. "Saw things no boy should see, did things no man should do. After I came back different. Started riding with bad men, doing bad things." He paused. "But there are lines, Sarah. Lines even an outlaw like me won't cross. What they did to you, keeping you like that, that's beyond any line I know." Sarah absorbed this, hearing the raw honesty in his words. "We leave at first light?" she asked after a moment. "Yeah, head for Montana Territory. I know places there where Henderson's name means nothing." "And then?" Jake was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. "Then you're free," he finally said, "to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. Freedom." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and uncertainty. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to imagine a future beyond running, beyond fear. It seemed as distant and unreachable as the stars outside. "Get some sleep," Jake murmured. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the pines. Inside, two damaged souls drifted toward sleep, each haunted by their own ghosts, each clinging to a fragile hope that dawn might bring something better than what they'd left behind. Wilson woke them before dawn, his movements quick and urgent. "Riders coming," he whispered. "At least 8 of them." Jake was on his feet instantly, the night's rest having restored some of his strength. His fever had broken as Wilson predicted, though the stitched wound still pulled painfully when he reached for his gun belt. "How far?" he asked, checking his Colt. "Half-mile, maybe less. Moving slow, like they're tracking." Sarah had already risen, folding the blankets with swift, economical movements. "Is there another way out of the canyon?" Wilson nodded grimly. "There's a trail up the back, steep but passable. Leads to high country." Jake considered their options. The smart move would be to run, to use the trail Wilson mentioned and disappear into the mountains. But that would leave Wilson to face Henderson's wrath alone. "You comin' with us?" Jake asked the older man. Wilson shook his head. "This post has been my home for 15 years. I ain't running. They'll burn it to the ground if they think you helped us." "Let 'em try." Wilson's weathered face creased in a humorless smile. "I've got surprises for anyone who comes at me unwelcome." Outside, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one. Time was running out. "Take supplies," Wilson ordered, handing Jake a sack he'd already prepared. "Food, ammunition, medicine for that arm. And take the bay mare out back. She's mountain-bred, sure-footed." Jake gripped the older man's shoulder. "I owe you, Wilson. You don't owe me a damn thing. Just keep that girl safe and maybe find yourself a better life than this." Wilson turned to Sarah. "There's clothes in that chest, riding clothes. They belonged to my daughter before the fever took her. Should fit you well enough." Sarah thanked him quietly, quickly changing behind a curtained alcove, while Jake and Wilson made final preparations. The pants and sturdy shirt felt strange after years in dresses, but the freedom of movement was worth the unfamiliarity. When she emerged, Wilson handed her a knife in a leather sheath. "Every woman should have one," he said simply. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Jake peered through a gap in the curtains. "They're here," he said flatly. "Henderson's in front." Wilson checked his shotgun. "You two go out the back. I'll keep them busy." Jake hesitated. "Wilson, go, damn you," the old traitor snapped. "That girl deserves a chance and you're it. Don't waste it." Sarah touched Jake's arm. "He's right. We need to go." With a final nod to Wilson, Jake led her through the back of the trading post to where a sturdy bay mare was tethered. They mounted quickly, Jake wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "The trail starts behind those rocks," he whispered, pointing to a nearly invisible path that wound up the canyon wall. From inside the trading post came the sound of the front door opening, followed by Wilson's voice, deliberately loud and cheerful. "Gentlemen, you're out early. What can I do for you?" Victor Henderson's reply was too low to catch, but his tone was unmistakably threatening. Jake and Sarah urged the mare forward, picking their way carefully to avoid dislodging rocks that might give away their position. They had just reached the trail when a shout from the trading post told them they'd been discovered. "They've been here. Fresh horse tracks out back." Gunshots erupted, followed by the boom of Wilson's shotgun. Jake hesitated, looking back toward the trading post with naked conflict on his face. "Jake," Sarah said urgently, "we can't help him now." Another shotgun blast decided the matter. Jake nodded grimly, and they pressed on, the mare scrambling up the steep trail as more gunfire echoed through the canyon. They had climbed perhaps 100 feet when a bullet whined off the rocks beside them. Jake turned to see 3 riders emerging from behind the trading post, Victor Henderson in the lead. "Keep going," Jake shouted to Sarah, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "I'll catch up." This time, Sarah didn't argue. She urged the mare upward while Jake took position behind a boulder, sighting down his rifle at the approaching riders. His first shot caught one man in the chest, knocking him from his saddle. The others scattered, taking cover behind rocks and scrub pine. Jake fired twice more, forcing them to keep their heads down, before retreating further up the trail. The rising sun cast long shadows across the canyon, as Jake caught up with Sarah at a small plateau halfway up the cliff face. Below, the trading post was now clearly visible, and with it, a sight that made Jake's blood run cold. Wilson lay sprawled on the ground before his store, unmoving. Victor Henderson stood over him, giving orders to his men. Even from this distance, Jake could see the arrogant confidence in the rancher's bearing. "Is he?" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "I think so," Jake replied grimly. "Wilson was a good man." "Because of me," Sarah whispered. "Another death because of me." Jake turned to her sharply. "No, because of them. Because of Henderson and his kind who think they own everything and everyone." He took her hand, his grip firm and insistent. "Don't you take their guilt on yourself." Their eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them that went beyond words. Then Jake looked back down at the scene below. Henderson was organizing his men, sending some around the base of the cliff to cut off any escape route, while others prepared to follow the trail directly. "We need to move," Jake said. "Get over the ridge before they surround us." They continued climbing, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. The mare struggled in places but pushed on gamely. By mid-morning, they had reached the summit ridge, a rocky spine that offered a breathtaking view of the wilderness stretching toward the Montana border. Jake reined in, studying the terrain ahead. "If we follow this ridge north for a few miles, there's a valley that leads to Blackfoot country. Henderson won't follow us there." Sarah nodded, too exhausted for words. The events of the past days had pushed her to her limits, yet there was a strength in her that refused to break. A rifle shot echoed from below, the bullet passing harmlessly overhead. Henderson's men had reached the lower part of the trail. "Time to go," Jake said, but as he turned the mare he saw riders emerging from the trees on the far side of the ridge, at least 4 of them, cutting off their escape route. "They've got us boxed in," he said grimly. Sarah's face was pale but determined. "What do we do?" Jake studied their position. The ridge offered some cover, a tumble of boulders and stunted pines, but they were effectively trapped between the 2 groups of pursuers. "We make a stand," he said finally. "Here." He helped Sarah dismount and sent the mare away with a slap on its flank. No sense keeping the animal in the line of fire. "Stay behind these rocks," he told Sarah, handing her his pistol. "If they get past me, use it." Sarah checked the weapon with surprising competence. "My father taught me to shoot before." She didn't need to finish. Jake nodded, positioning himself among the rocks with his rifle. The first group of Henderson's men was making its way steadily up the trail, while the riders on the far side were approaching more cautiously. "Jake," Sarah said suddenly, "if we don't make it, we'll make it." He cut her off. "But if we don't," she persisted, "I want you to know that these past days with you have been worth it, worth everything." Jake looked at her, truly looked, seeing not just the beauty that had first caught his attention, but the courage and resilience that had kept her spirit alive through years of captivity. "We're going to make it," he repeated softly. "I promise." The first shot came from below, kicking up dirt near Jake's position. He returned fire, the crack of his rifle echoing across the ridge. The battle had begun,